Hello everyone. Today we will learn 6 ways to create the illusion of space in art. And when I'm talking about space, I am not talking about outer space. I am talking about foreground, middle ground, and background. What's in the front closest to you and what's in the back farthest away from you. In this video, I am only going to cover overlap, shading, and placement. And then I will let you create an example drawing for each of these techniques. And then tomorrow we will go over the other 3 techniques: size, value and focus, and linear perspective. Linear perspective, we will have a separate lesson for this one. But let's just go ahead and focus on overlap, shading, and placement. And after you finish with your worksheet, I want you to take a look at the artwork that is in the on the discussion post and tell me what technique you think is being used to illustrate space in that artwork. So here is a quick picture picture that demonstrates the 6 ways to show space. Once again, we will just go over overlap, shading, and placement for today. But you can see there is size, value and focus, and linear perspective. So there are many ways to create the illusion of space. And this is for 2-dimensional artworks like drawing or painting or collage. Or any materials that is just to create an artwork on a flat 2-dimensional background. So here is overlap, and I want you to print out the worksheet that I have provided for you. But if you cannot print out the worksheet, you can always create one on a blank sheet of paper, draw 3 boxes, label it overlap, shading, and placement. On the back is going to be size, value and focus, and linear perspective. So you can just create a box or a worksheet on your own. That's fine too. So overlap is the placement of objects over one another in order to create the illusion of depth, which is space. For example, on this slide right here, the oval is overlapping the square. The oval is the foreground, that's the front, closest to you, and the square is in the background, that's the object that is farther away from you. So here I created an example drawing to demonstrate that I understand what overlap means. I drew a tree, and then I drew another tree in the background, and I know that because this tree is overlapping this one, I can't really see the whole entire tree. So I want you to write what you need to write to help you understand overlap. You do not have to copy the whole definition. You can simply just write a sentence to describe what you drew. You can write keywords that will help you understand. So the keywords would be overlap, it would be foreground, background, whatever keywords that will help you understand what overlap means. And you can take a pause, you can pause the video for you to work on each technique. But I am going to move on to the next one, which is shading. But actually, before I move on, let's take a look at some students' artwork that demonstrated overlap. So the first one here is a drawing, and the students used the balloons to overlap one another to show foreground, middle ground, and background. The foreground balloons is the ones on the left because I can see the whole entire shape of the balloon. And then the background balloon is somewhere over here because it's been overlapped by the other 3 balloons. And then you have collages, and collages are artworks that use paper, cutting paper, and then gluing them to create an image. And you can see these organic shapes and lines are overlapping the big, larger rectangles in the background. All right, let's move on to shading. And shading is when you use values of a color to show shadow and light. Values is the range from lightness to darkness of a color. This is a grayscale value, a value scale right here. But you can do this with any color. You will just have to show a range from dark to light of that particular color. So shading is wonderful in a way because it helps you turn something from a flat shape to a three-dimensional shape. So from two-dimensional, that means flat, to three-dimensional form. So here I can shade this circle. Originally it was just a circle, and then I used shading by providing dark and light to turn it into a sphere. So I am going to show you 3 different ways to show shading in your work. So the first way, I'm going to draw this box, is called hatching. And hatching is when you just make lines in the same direction. Alright? The second way is cross hatching. And cross hatching is when you start with hatching and then you go the opposite direction. And the third way is stippling, and stippling is when you just make dots. And when you have dots that are just bunched up and close to one another, it will show a much darker shade versus dots that are a little spread out and further apart. It would appear to be much lighter shade. And as you are working with this, I am using a pencil so I can change the pressure, how hard I push down on the pencil or how light I push down on the pencil. So now I'm going to show that demonstrate how I understand shading. I will either write the definition or some keywords or an example sentence to show that I understand shading. Like I said, I'm going to draw a circle, and then the darkest would be the shadow, right? If the light is casting from this direction here, that's light, then the darkest part would be the shadow. And then I'm going to use one of these 3 techniques. I will use cross hatching. So I'm going to begin with the darkest part of this circle. And then I'll do the opposite direction. And then after I do the darkest part, I'm going to get a little lighter with lighter hatching marks. I'm following the contour of this circle. And you can start to see that it's starting to look a little bit more three-dimensional, like a sphere. And then the pressure, as I'm moving toward the light, it should get darker and just separated. They're further apart, and then it gets darker. It gets lighter and lighter. So the pressure of my pencil is getting softer and lighter. You can also draw light marks as well. What I like to do is sometimes I like to use my fingers and blend them together as well. So this technique is shading, and you can see now I just turned it from a circle to a sphere. Alright, so let's take a look at this slide. You can see there are many ways to, many techniques to show shading. Hatching I showed you, stippling I showed you, cross hatching I showed you. I even blended to show you as well. Scrumbling is just kind of just go scribble scrabble all over the place. That's scrumbling. All right. Okay, we are going to move on to placement now. And placement is the arrangement of objects on a paper. So you would arrange it from the bottom, the middle, or the top of a sheet of paper to show foreground, middle ground, and background. So to make this a little bit easier to understand, here is a sheet of paper, and what it's trying to tell you here is the higher your object goes onto the sheet of paper, the farther it would appear. So it'll appear to be in the background if it's all the way back here. And then when it approaches you, it would appear to be in the foreground if it's closer to the bottom of your paper. So let's take a look at this picture right here. All of these spheres are the same size, but if you ask yourself the question, which one is the closest to you? The ones in the bottom of the paper, the placement with the bottom of the paper would appear to be closer to you than the one that is the higher or at the top of the paper. All right. What about this picture? Which shapes looks the closest or look closest to you? Most of you will think that it's the ones that right here, the circle and the square right here will appear to be closer to you. But even though they're all the same size, so that is a technique to show you how to that placement is a technique to show you how to make objects appear in the foreground, even though they are all the same size. So here I have the bottom of the paper here, the middle of the paper somewhere over here, and the top of the paper somewhere over here. And I am going to draw, I will draw a tree to show you. So this tree, I'm going to draw the bottom of the paper. And then I'll do the same size tree. But I'll start drawing at the middle of the paper. And you can, even though it's the same size, you can start to feel like it's actually going back into space. And then the one that higher up at the top of the paper will appear to be in the background farther away from you, and they're all the same size. So this is another way to demonstrate space in art. All right, so once you are done with this worksheet, go ahead and go back to the discussion post and tell me which technique or techniques you think is being demonstrated in that artwork. All right, answer as a discussion post, answer to the post by click on start a new thread, or you can answer using video note.